The heavy oak doors swung open. It was Beatrice, the mother of the bride. Beatrice was a woman who wore her privilege like a weapon. She possessed the kind of old money that made her believe everyone in the room was simply a disposable prop in her personal stage play. She stopped next to me, inspecting a silver table centerpiece with a look of mild, calculated disgust. "It is adequate, I suppose," she murmured, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Then, she finally turned her gaze to me, her lips curling into a tight, condescending smile. "You people in the service industry are always so remarkably dutiful, aren't you? Just blindly following instructions. It must be so peaceful, not having to carry the real burden of leadership or intelligence. I have learned that anger is a luxury you cannot afford when you are a black woman operating in spaces designed to keep you out. The arrangements will be flawless for tomorrow's ceremony, ma'am," I replied smoothly, my voice a calm, flat line. "Everything is exactly according to the signed agreement," she scoffed quietly, turning away to march toward the main staging office. I followed a few paces behind to retrieve my master schedule. As I reached the doorway, I paused. The door was slightly ajar. Through the narrow gap, I watched Beatrice stand alone by the desk. She looked over her shoulder, ensuring the hallway was empty. She did not see me standing silently in the shadows. With a swift, practiced motion, she picked up the thick envelope of cash, opened her oversized designer bag, and dropped the money straight inside. She was stealing from her own daughter's wedding fund. More importantly, she was stealing the exact deposit that was legally required to keep the doors of this venue open tomorrow morning. Most people would have burst into the room. Most people would have confronted her, screaming about theft, justice, and morality. But I am not most people. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my mind. A $2 million wedding does not run on romance, and it certainly does not run on hope. It runs on paper. Contracts, vendor agreements, physical signatures, and strict liability clauses. My name is Clara. For 20 years, I have orchestrated the most exclusive, high-stakes events on the East Coast of the United States. When a crystal chandelier shatters during setup, or a catering company suddenly loses power, people panic. I do not. I simply open my leather-bound portfolio, read the fine print, and adjust the board. I am the architect of the invisible structure that keeps these massive events from collapsing. We were exactly 24 hours away from the grandest society Wedding Charleston had seen in a decade. The venue was a sprawling, historic mansion, the kind of place where the walls practically drip with generational wealth and unearned entitlement. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, making sure the environment was flawless. 150 mahogany chairs were aligned with mathematical precision. The towering floral arrangements were secured perfectly. Every moving part of this massive machine was bound by the strict rules resting in my hand. Beatrice walked out of the office, smoothing her dress, acting as if absolutely nothing had happened. She had just created a massive financial black hole, and I knew exactly who she was going to blame when the venue owner demanded his money. She was going to frame me to cover her tracks. But as I watched her walk away, I didn't stop her. I didn't check her bag, and I didn't call the authorities. I simply looked down at the bright red vendor liability folder in my hands and let a slow, icy smile cross my face. She thought she was playing a brilliant game of power. Why did I let her walk away with the money? Because she didn't realize she had just handed me the match to burn her entire kingdom to the ground. The groom's family, the Garcias, had just arrived. Mr. Garcia, a man who built his fortune in commercial real estate, was an imposing figure who expected absolute perfection and paid heavily for it. He was funding this entire $2 million spectacle. Everything was running like a Swiss watch, until the grand ballroom doors slammed open with a dramatic, echoing thud. Beatrice marched in, her face twisted into a mask of theatrical panic. She was clutching the thick, brown deposit envelope I had seen her empty into her designer bag just 30 minutes prior. Now, the envelope was crumpled and entirely flat. Behind her trailed a young, white-eyed blonde woman holding a clipboard that looked entirely too heavy for her. "Stop everything!" Beatrice's voice cut through the massive room, loud enough to force the florists to drop their shears. She rushed straight toward Mr. Garcia, bypassing me entirely. James, we have a catastrophic emergency. The venue owner's cash deposit, it's gone. $50,000 vanished from the staging office. The entire ballroom went dead silent. Mr. Garcia's expression hardened into granite. He turned slowly to look at me. I knew it, she hissed, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. I warned you, James. I told you we should have used someone from our own circles. Fortunately, my niece Emily here has a degree in communications. She has agreed to step in and save my daughter's wedding from this criminal disaster. We do not need this thief ruining our family's reputation on the eve of the ceremony. I looked at Emily. Her hands were shaking violently. She didn't know the first thing about managing a 50-person unionized crew, let alone a high society wedding. Beatrice was setting her up to be a disposable puppet while she ran the show and kept the $50,000. Two bulky private security guards, hired by Beatrice naturally, stepped into the ballroom and flanked me. Mr. Garcia crossed his arms. Do you have anything to say for yourself? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. I will gather my personal items and leave, I said, my voice steady, betraying absolutely zero emotion. Beatrice smirked, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Escort her off the property immediately. Do not let her touch another thing. My eyes were locked dead ahead on the main catering table near the exit. Resting perfectly flat next to a silver tray was a thick, bright red folder. Emblazoned on the front in bold black letters were the words, Vendor Liability and Master Insurance Protocol. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom closed behind me, cutting off the manufactured outrage of Beatrice and the Garcia family. I was now flanked by two massive private security guards. By industry standard, a terminated vendor is legally entitled to a strictly monitored 15-minute window to gather personal effects. I didn't need 15 minutes. I needed about 4. As we walked down the sprawling, velvet-lined hallway, I could hear the sharp click of the staging office door locking, echoing from the other wing. Beatrice had moved quickly. She was securing my main base of operations, seizing my master laptops, my digital schedules, and my contact lists. Ma'am, we need you to head toward the front exit. The guard on my left grunted, shifting his weight. My coat and personal medication are in the secondary staging area. I replied, my voice a flat, unbothered monotone. Section 4B of the venue protocol allows me to retrieve them. The guard hesitated, exchanged a brief glance with his partner, and nodded. We bypassed the grand foyer entirely and pushed through the heavy swinging doors into the industrial catering kitchen. The shift in atmosphere was instant. The kitchen was a roaring engine of stainless steel, open flames, and shouting line cooks. You hide it in plain sight, in the one place high society clients like Beatrice refused to enter, the grease-stained, chaotic prep zones. Hanging on a cheap metal hook next to the fire extinguisher was a battered clipboard. To anyone else, it held standard municipal health inspection forms. I reached out, flipped the top 3 pages of boring health codes, and slid out the 2 carbon copy sheets secured underneath. They were the master vendor agreements, the raw, physical contracts bearing the original signatures of every single supplier. Just as the paper disappeared into my lining, the swinging kitchen doors violently burst open. It was Beatrice. Her chest was heaving, her perfectly styled hair slightly out of place. She had realized, a minute too late, that I hadn't been thrown directly out the front door. She had sprinted down the service corridor, panicked at the terrifying thought of me speaking to the culinary team and exposing her theft to the working class. What is she still doing here? Beatrice shrieked, the shrill sound cutting right through the heavy noise of the industrial kitchen. The line cooks froze. Chef Marcus looked up, wiping his hands on a towel, thoroughly confused. Beatrice marched toward me, her eyes darting frantically. She is fired. Remove her from this room immediately. Do not let her speak to anyone. She positioned herself between me and the chef, physically blocking my line of sight, panting heavily. She thought she had intercepted me. She thought she had successfully stopped the bleeding. I'm leaving right now, Beatrice, I said quietly, giving her a slow nod. I turned my back on her and took 2 steps toward the exit. Then, pausing just beside Chef Marcus, I casually pulled a brightly colored, single-page document from my inner pocket. Without breaking my stride, I pressed it firmly into his hand. "Read this carefully, Marcus," I whispered so only he could hear. The guards ushered me out the back delivery doors and into the humid Charleston afternoon. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, locking automatically. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV, parked just beyond the heavy iron gates of the estate. Inside that sprawling historic house, I knew exactly what Beatrice was doing. I didn't need to be psychic to see it. Arrogance operates on a very predictable, repetitive schedule. She was likely holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, marching her terrified niece Emily around the ballroom. She assumed that event planning was nothing more than picking out silk napkin rings and tasting imported cake. She didn't understand the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of corporate liability. The yellow piece of paper I had pressed into Chef Marcus's hand before leaving wasn't a petty threat. It was a standard, legally binding notice of insurance revocation. In the high-stakes world of elite event management, the venue, the vendors, and the clients do not insure the weekend. I do. My agency carries a massive $10 million umbrella policy that covers every single hazard on that property. It covers the open gas flames in the industrial kitchen. It covers the 500-pound crystal chandeliers hanging directly over the guests' heads. It covers the unionized waitstaff carrying heavy, boiling hot plates through crowded rooms. And right at the bottom of that yellow form, printed in bold black ink, was an unbendable clause stating that if my agency was terminated or forcibly removed from the premises, all liability coverage immediately dropped to zero. I pulled out my phone and tapped a single button on my dashboard screen. I called my corporate broker in New York. The call lasted exactly 30 seconds. I verbally confirmed my physical removal from the property. He typed a few keystrokes into his terminal, and just like that, the multi-million-dollar invisible shield protecting Beatrice, the Garcias, and the entire wedding evaporated into thin air. Now, the dominoes began to fall. Through my windshield, I watched the heavy loading dock doors at the side of the mansion swing wide open. A man in a high-visibility vest walked out, holding a clipboard, pressing a phone frantically to his ear. It was the lead rigger for the lighting company. I watched as a white utility van aggressively backed into the driveway. The floral team was already taking down the exterior archways. The caterers were violently shoving racks of chilled lobster back into their refrigerated trucks. The machine wasn't just stopping, it was actively and rapidly dismantling itself to avoid catastrophic legal exposure. Inside the heavily soundproofed ballroom, Beatrice was completely oblivious to the silent evacuation happening in the service wings. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the immaculate lawn. The first fleet of black luxury cars was turning onto the main avenue, carrying 300 of the wealthiest people in the state for the exclusive rehearsal dinner. When she did, she wouldn't find a subservient staff waiting for her orders. She would find an empty room, and a nightmare she couldn't buy her way out of. What exactly was waiting for her in that kitchen? I stepped out of the air-conditioned sanctuary of my SUV, my slim leather portfolio tucked neatly under my arm. The heavy, humid Charleston air hit me immediately, but I felt perfectly chilled. I walked back up the sweeping gravel driveway toward the main entrance of the historic estate. There were no private security guards rushing out to stop me this time. I entered the grand foyer. The absolute silence that usually defined this aristocratic space was broken by the sharp, echoing sounds of industrial packing tape and heavy metal dollies rolling across the hardwood. I walked purposefully toward the grand ballroom, my footsteps steady and unhurried. When I reached the open double doors, I stopped in the archway to observe the masterpiece of my own destruction. The room was unrecognizable. The towering, majestic floral centerpieces were gone, replaced by bare folding tables. The hundreds of mahogany chairs were stacked high, being wheeled out the side exits by tight-lipped union workers. The crystal glassware was already boxed. In the very center of this rapid, mechanical teardown stood Beatrice. She looked like a queen whose castle was actively being repossessed. She was spinning in frantic circles, her expensive silk dress catching the harsh, unfiltered staging lights. She was grabbing at the arms of passing waitstaff, demanding they stop, ordering them to unpack the tables. Suddenly, the heavy side doors slammed open with terrifying force. It was James Garcia, the groom's billionaire father. He had just arrived from the rehearsal dinner preparations, anticipating a pristine final walkthrough of his massive investment. Instead, he stepped into a barren, echoing warehouse. His face immediately hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't shout. Men with his kind of money rarely need to. He simply demanded an explanation with a voice so low and commanding it froze the remaining workers in their tracks. Beatrice saw her opportunity. She practically sprinted toward him, tears of manufactured panic already forming in her eyes. She pointed frantically toward the departing caterers, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. She told him that the vendors were incompetent, that the entire situation was a disaster, and that the fired planner, meaning me, had maliciously ordered a strike out of pure spite for being caught stealing. I decided it was time to clock back in. I stepped fully into the ballroom. The sharp click of my heels against the bare floorboards drew their attention instantly. Beatrice gasped, her eyes widening in a mixture of profound shock and rising terror. She tried to summon her previous authority, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. I did not acknowledge her. I didn't raise my voice, and I certainly didn't engage in a shouting match. I maintained a calm, neutral expression, walking a straight line until I stood directly in front of Mr. Garcia. The air between us was thick with tension, but my pulse was as steady as a metronome. "Mr. Garcia," I said, my voice smooth, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "The venue deposit was never stolen, nor was it misplaced. It was formally and legally removed from my custody exactly 1 hour before I was escorted off the premises." Beatrice let out a sharp, derisive laugh, calling me a desperate liar. I didn't look at her. 2 hours earlier, when Beatrice had demanded to inspect the cash envelope to ensure the venue was being paid with the correct denominations, I had simply slid this form across the desk. She had been so blinded by her own arrogance, so dismissive of the service workers' paperwork, that she had impatiently scribbled her name without reading the header. She thought she was signing a meaningless access log. She didn't realize she was legally adopting the full custody of $50,000. Mr. Garcia looked down at the document. Right at the bottom, printed clearly in blue ink, was Beatrice's sweeping, unmistakable signature, right next to the exact timestamp of the transfer. The ink proved exactly who took the money, long before she slipped it into her designer bag. Mr. Garcia read the document twice. His eyes traced the signature, and then he slowly lowered the paper. He turned his head toward Beatrice. The silence in that cavernous ballroom wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, pressing down on the bare wooden floors, the remaining crew members, and most heavily on Beatrice. I stood perfectly still, my hands loosely clasped in front of me, watching Mr. Garcia's eyes trace the blue ink of her signature for a third time. "You took the cash," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a granite-solid fact. Beatrice's meticulously crafted aristocratic facade shattered in an instant. Her face flushed a deep, panicked crimson. She opened her mouth, her hands fluttering defensively, but the elegant, passive-aggressive vocabulary she usually wielded so effortlessly completely failed her. She stammered something completely incoherent about a misunderstanding, about moving the funds for temporary safekeeping, and about my supposed overarching incompetence. It was pathetic. It was the distinct sound of a woman realizing that her lifelong privilege had finally collided with an immovable wall of raw, documented truth. Mr. Garcia didn't let her finish the thought. He raised one hand, a sharp, commanding gesture that instantly cut off her frantic, bubbling excuses. He turned seamlessly to his private security team, the exact same bulky men who had proudly escorted me out of the building just a few hours prior. "Remove her from the property," he ordered coldly. "She is no longer permitted on the grounds for the rehearsal dinner tonight. Tomorrow, she may attend the ceremony as a standard guest in the back row. If she speaks to a single vendor or touches a single piece of equipment, have her arrested for trespassing." Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She looked frantically around the massive, empty room, searching desperately for an ally, for someone to save her from the absolute public humiliation of being physically thrown out of her own daughter's wedding. But there was no one. When the heavy wooden doors clicked shut, plunging the ballroom back into a tense silence, Mr. Garcia finally turned to me. He didn't offer a warm, emotional apology, and I didn't expect one. We were both professionals. We dealt in immediate solutions, not sentiment. The missing funds will be replaced via wire transfer in exactly 10 minutes, he said flatly. I will triple your original management fee, payable immediately. What do you need to stop this evacuation? I didn't smile. I simply pulled my phone from my blazer pocket and checked the time. I need my staging office unlocked, my master schedule returned, and a direct line to the union steward, I replied. He nodded once. Done. I dialed my corporate broker in New York. The call took exactly 20 seconds. I gave the verbal authorization, and the $10 million liability shield was instantly locked back into place. The moment the call ended, I walked over to the heavy loading dock doors and pushed them wide open. The fleet of departing delivery trucks was already halfway down the long gravel driveway. It was a small, almost invisible gesture in the grand scheme of things. But within 30 seconds, the brake lights of a dozen massive vehicles flared bright red in the descending twilight. The heavy diesel engines roared as the trucks shifted into reverse. The metal dollies hit the pavement once again. The florists, the caterers, the lighting crews, the entire magnificent, multi-million-dollar machine, turned around and marched right back into the building. It took exactly 15 minutes for the pulse of the event to return to a flawless, unstoppable rhythm. If you enjoyed watching this masterclass in professional revenge and seeing arrogance dismantled by the rules it refused to read, make sure you hit the subscribe button, leave a comment about your favorite moment of poetic justice, and join us for the next story. The world is full of entitled people, and I have plenty of clipboards waiting for them.